Okay, good afternoon, Edwin Rutsch. Thank you so much for joining me again this afternoon to talk about empathy and leadership with empathy. If we could start off the conversation by you just telling me about yourself and your organization.
Okay, I'm like you said, Edwin Rutsch. I'm here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and for about 14 years, I've been working on the topic of empathy and started the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy. And just got very interested in the topic when I was doing a documentary, about human values, and came across the value of empathy and said, this is a super important value, and going to dedicate the rest of my life as it is to this value, and been working at it ever since.
So, okay, so there's a dictionary definition for empathy, but in your own words, what is empathy?
Yeah, I think that's a great starting point, to look at the value of empathy, because how are we defining our terms? Because there's a lot of definitions to empathy. People use it differently. Sometimes the definitions are actually canceling each other out, so
Mm-hmm.
it's can be very confusing. So it's good to start with, how are we using the words, get our definition, so we're talking about the same
Yeah.
phenomenon. So it's excellent starting point. So for me, it's the definition I use is uh, from the sort of based on the work of Carl Rogers. And Carl
Mm-hmm.
Rogers is considered to be one of the top two or three most influential clinical psychologists. And he worked with empathy and using empathy in the therapeutic sense. And he described it and explained it, did a lot of work on explaining it. But
Mm-hmm.
at the core of empathy, I see it as sort of sensing into the experience and sensing into the experience of someone else, their feelings, their thoughts, their values, their needs. So the whole wholeness of who they are, sort of
Mm-hmm.
feeling, sensing into that. And Carl Rogers has a metaphor that he uses is going on someone else's journey. So here you are, you're interviewing me, you're going on my journey with me, accompanying me. And empathy is like not judging the journey of someone else. It's not analyzing the journey. It's not trying to direct the journey, say, hey, no, let's go this direction. Let's go this direction. It's like, I'm going to go with you on your journey. And it's not like detaching, saying, I'm going to go my own direction, so I'm going
Yeah.
to be here, I'm going to be present. And so that's sort of a foundation. There's other sort of components that I like to
Mm-hmm.
go into, like self-empathy, which is
Mm-hmm.
sensing into your own experience, being sensitive to that. And then there's sort of more sophisticated, extra steps, which is sometimes called role playing or perspective taking. And I would call it imaginative empathy, that we can
Mm-hmm.
imagine being anyone and imagine what it's like being in that role. For example, Meryl Streep, as an actress, taking
Yeah.
on the role of Margaret Thatcher or Julia Childs, just imagining and feeling into that. So that's sort of the core of how I'm using the word.
And that is, of course, different from sympathy, which I think a lot of people mistake the two. So, in your thinking, what is the difference between sympathy and empathy?
Yeah. So when if you're sharing something that where you're feeling some distress or some pain, or that the sympathy is, instead of me just staying with you, hearing your pain, hearing your suffering, I start going on to my own journey. Say, oh, I feel so sorry for you. See, it's going into my own sense of sadness, my own sense of grief, my own sense of pain. So I'm no
Mm-hmm.
longer staying present with you and accompanying you on your journey. I'm sort of going off on my own journey with my, focusing on my own feelings of feeling sorry for you, basically.
Yeah. So I know earlier you said that came across the concept and decided to dedicate your life to this whole thing of empathy and forwarding that particular agenda. Tell us a little bit more about your organization and the kinds of work that you do with people and to forward the agenda of empathy.
Yeah, so as I was mentioning, about 14 years ago, I started the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy. So I began just accumulating resources. So the website Culture of Empathy has like the largest collection of empathy related material. So it's a central sort of a wiki, sort of like a wiki of resources and material. And
Mhm.
then I also started interviewing experts in the field. And so there's like 14 years of interviews, like you're interviewing me now. I'll add this to the collection. And there's like well over 300 interviews with some of the top experts, be it academics, educators, practitioners, therapists, you name it, and
Mhm.
anything, business leaders. And then there's also a resource for community. We have like 30,000 people in our Facebook page. So we're building community around it.
Mhm.
We have a lot of, have been working on developing empathy practices. So the listening skills, the mediation, empathic mediation. And we
Mhm.
also started created this empathy tent that we go out in public, actually set up this empathy tent out on the street, in public spaces, and offer listening to people who are coming by. And recently, in the last 4 or 5 years, we've been taking it to political demonstrations too, where the political left and right are battling it out. They're having street fights. And we set up the empathy tent and say, hey, we're here to listen to both sides. We want
Uh,
to listen to the political right. We want to listen to the political left. And also we try to bring them together in empathic dialogue. And at the present, we're just really focusing on developing trainings and for the empathy circle practice is sort of a current focus.
that empathy tent sounds pretty intense and quite interesting as well. What kind of results do you see or expect from that type of
Well, yeah,
activity?
I live near Berkeley, the University of California, Berkeley, and the political right would come to Berkeley and they say, we
Uh-huh.
want free speech. And the political left, which is a very leftist sort of community here, would come out and counter demonstrate. And we were actually able to bring, parties together where they could talk
Mhm.
to each other. And there was one filmmaker came and interviewed us, in the tent. She'd been, after Trump had been elected, she'd gone around to all these different rallies and
Mhm.
all these battles that they're having all over the country. And she said, you're the only ones doing this, sort of offering empathy. And she invited us down to Los Angeles to an impeach Trump rally, a couple of years ago. And it was several thousand impeached Trumpers and then counter rally. And we set up the empathy tent. We had 6 pairs of people,
Mhm.
one person from each side come into the empathy tent. We would do I facilitated an empathy circle with each other. And each of those circles ended with hugs between the participants and agreeing to continue doing empathy circles online. And it's in the documentary Trump Phobia, What Both Sides Fear. So the empathy tent is, so that's actually what I'm talking about is
Yeah,
shown in that documentary.
I definitely am gonna have to take in that to see it in action. But I did have the opportunity over the weekend to see the Empathy Circle in action. I attended one of your sessions, and as I indicated, it was an interesting experience. So tell us a little bit about what the Empathy Circle is and what you have been doing with that practice.
Yeah, that's just great to have you in that circle this last weekend. So glad you could take part in it. Really enjoyed your presence. And this is based on, again, on the work of Carl Rogers, that he used empathic listening in the counseling context, like a client and therapist.
Mhm.
The client comes to the therapist, and the therapist offers empathic listening, just listens, doesn't judge, doesn't try to analyze, just listens deeply. And it was just shown that this is the most effective sort of component of therapy, is just deep listening. And but it's within this context of the client therapist. What we're doing is taking that basic empathic listening model and making it a mutual listening. There's no one who's a therapist. There's no one who's a client. We're just all equal human beings listening to each other and practicing these skills. And as you experience, we have a topic, it can be whatever topic you want. You can talk about whatever is alive for you, whatever you have energy around, and you share it. You select who you're going to speak to. You share your ideas, and you share an idea or two, and you pause. And the listener that you selected reflects back their understanding of what you've said. And then you check out, did they understand it? And if they did, you continue speaking. If they didn't understand it, you kind of share it again, maybe in different words, until you really feel that the person you're speaking to understood it. And then we have time limits, because people will go on and on and on.
Yes.
Like, here, you're interviewing me, I'll go on and on and on. Right? You can't get people to stop. So
Yeah.
we have a time limit. We hold up the time. Our facilitator holds up the time. There's maybe 4 or 5 people in the circle. You say, okay, your time is up, 5 minutes up. At that point, the listener becomes the speaker, and they select who they're going to speak to, and then they speak on the topic, and they get a reflection, and we go around like that for the time allotted, maybe a couple hours, an hour or 2 hours. And this is just a way for each person to feel heard and understood to their satisfaction. You sort of are practicing the listening. You have to really focus to be able to reflect back your understanding to the speaker's satisfaction. And I just find this practice to be the most effective first step gateway practice. And it's like just a really good starting place. And it's very accessible practice that, most anyone can learn it fairly quickly. And you just keep practicing it. You just get better and better. And I think it really improves your empathy skills.
Well, as I mentioned on Saturday in the session, it was not easy. It was quite difficult to put all of your attention on the individual and really focus on what they were saying, and try not to add your bits to it or edit it in any way, but really just reflect back to the individual. And one of the participants, or was it your co-facilitator, indicated that it was a lifetime practice, that it's something that you do have to continue practicing on and on. So
Yeah.
you started off, you said it's a gateway practice. And what do you do after that, to get kind of deeper into the practice of empathy?
Yeah, like you experienced when you just started just doing it, the first, time or two that you do it, it's like, oh, I'm a little anxious. I'm going to be judged for not listening well. I have to really focus. And there's a sense of concentration.
Yes.
Am I going to get it right? So it's a little anxiety producing, but you start getting better at it. And then also you start feeling heard. I'm sure other people were hearing you, and you start saying, oh, this feels pretty good. I'm being heard and understood. I'm not being judged. So that probably added some relaxation, that that you were going to be heard. But with this basic skill, you're getting better at listening to others. So when you go out with your other relationships, your family, friends, you have sort of that sense of being able to listen, to focus, and be concentrating and, listening to your family members, hearing them more deeply. And, they sense it. They sense when you're listening to them really well, and they'll probably open up more. And then you can invite them into a mutual empathy circle. Like, well, how about I'm doing all the listening for you. How about you listen to me now? So you start developing a more empathic relationship with family and friends. And this basic skill is very supportive. If you have a friend that's really suffering with some kind of emotional issue, if you can just sit and listen to them, be present, it's very healing for it's, as I was mentioning, it's core to the counseling. Throughout the whole counseling community, this empathic listening is a central healing practice. And then there's also the conflict mediation. You take it from this basic skill, once you're able to facilitate a circle yourself, which we do have the training for that, you can then bring people who are in conflict into a circle, and then you can add layers of skills on how do you address and resolve conflict. So it's a foundation to conflict resolution skills. And then that same, you can add other practices, like I know you're interested in business and in leadership.
Mhm.
And for any sort of design work, for any business that's designing products, services, processes, they need to be sensitive to the felt experience of who they're designing for. So then you have that skill to be able to listen better to the people you're designing for. And if you're a leader, you're able to, as a leader, you're actually, a lot of it is just managing people, right? People are in conflict, they have personal problems, they bring it to you as a leader. They've got interpersonal problems with each other. So with the empathy circle, you can use that practice, the mindset, as well as the skill to have like employees or people you're leading, kind of support them in working out their issues like that. So it's sort of, that's sort of the starting point, is the empathy circle, and it just builds and builds and builds. And I think you can build a whole culture basically with this basic building block.
I'm glad you took it to the organizational context, because I did want to talk about that. A lot of people would say that organizations, the purpose of an organization is really to make money, profits for shareholders and key stakeholders, etc. Empathy seems not necessarily aligned to that. Why would an organization, or should an organization be concerned about building a culture of empathy?
Yeah, so just that it's for saying that it's business is just for profit, I think is just sort of self-interest only. And I think we also live in a world context, a global context. We have to think of the well-being of the whole system. So, if we're ignoring the whole social system and it's collapsing around us, I mean, it's just, so we need to, I think have a bigger picture of the well-being of not only the organization, but the well-being of the society we're in, and really the well-being. So I think it's a little bit of a different framing. You could say that if an organization is only thinking about profit, if they're able to empathize with their their clients, their customers, that they're going to be able to be more efficient. That if they're able to have their employees, or the people in the company, be able to work more efficiently with each other by being able to work through problems, are going to be much more efficient, and again, be able to deal with profits. So if it's just self-interest, I think it's very helpful just in that self-interest track, but also the track of thinking of the well-being of society, the well-being of the people, the employees. What's their stress level? Are they be able to hear each other? Are they able to work through problems? Are they able to take empathy to their families, and really create a whole culture of this empathy, which I think just creates greater well-being for everyone involved, as well as the larger society as well.
Okay. So your employees can be their whole selves in an organization, rather than trying to compartmentalize who they are.
Yeah, that's going to be very stressful if you're not able to be your whole self. There's a lot of stress, and stress is, can be toxic, and it burn people out too. So, yeah.
So what kind of steps can an organization take, and leaders in an organization take, to help build a culture of empathy from your practice?
The first is having that intention, like, oh, I see, you've seen, a leader says, I see that this is important. I've experienced that it's important. And so I have the intention of fostering this. So having that sense of an intention. And I think that the empathy circle is a good starting point, again, in terms of learning those skills of listening. So bring employees together for mutual listening. If there's a leader, that they learn how to facilitate an empathy circle and bring the employees together, and then have different times to have these empathic dialogues with each other, to learn these skills. And it's sort of a mindset. The more we practice it, the more sensitive we are to the felt experience of others and ourselves. So it's slowly sort of expanding that mindset, as well as, that support the employees taking empathy circles home. At home, there's plenty of problems with family members, right? They're in conflict. Their family members don't feel like they're heard. Doing family empathy circles also helps to create a culture of empathy in the family. So it's really sort of spreading that empathic sort of mindset with the intention, holding those empathy circles. And then, there's a lot of tools that can be built on that. Everyone can learn how to facilitate the conflict. So if a conflict comes up in the business, you say, oh, I'd like to have an empathy circle. We have a conflict. We have an empathy circle, and I'll reflect back what you say, you reflect back what I say, and we just kind of work out. And so it will help work out kind of conflicts. And then you got the whole human-centered design sort of process. If your company has design skills, is in the design community, anything that you want to design, you start seeing what the problem is, and then you use empathy to start designing. You become a designer yourself. The company starts designing its culture using design skills, right? It's like, oh, let's have a human-centered design team that starts interviewing staff members, employees, and what are your problems? How do we design, how do we create, empathy maps, journey maps of people's experience, and all those tools of design. So this is sort of like a gateway into the whole human-centered design framework too.
As you're speaking, and you mentioned the idea of journey maps, I know that organizations, when they think about customer experience, they do take a look at and build out journey maps, customer journey maps. And I really didn't think about empathy being intertwined into that. But as you're speaking, I see how it could actually be beneficial to, use the concept of empathy in thinking about your customers and what they go through when they have to interact with your organization.
Its core, a journey map to me is really an empathy map, because it's like a person sees, what does a person experience when they see the advertising for the business, or what their need is. And each step of the way, the customer has a visceral feeling experience. Do they feel suspicious? Do they feel engaged? Do they feel, and you're just sort of mapping the whole steps when they have the product. What is their experience? Are they feeling frustrated? And so, one of the threads of the journey map is laying out the felt experience, moment to moment through the whole process of interacting with the product.
So how does your organization support companies and leaders in terms of building that culture?
Well, I've been focusing, pretty much on the empathy circle as a practice. So I'm kind of looking at the larger cultural, our mission is to raise the level of empathy in society, which includes, families, businesses, schools, kind of any environment. And we just see that the empathy circle is like a foundational practice that's very reproducible. So we're really trying to focus on teaching as many people as possible, how to take part in, facilitate, and then teach the practice. So hopefully it's scalable, and it'll scale with our foundation. Basic mission is to teach every person in the world how to take part in an empathy circle and to be able to facilitate one. So that's sort of the larger vision within a company. I've worked like with Thrive, the Ariana Huffington's group, and we had different lessons that we did on, Facebook, for example. They had we do like lectures, talks, empathy circle practices like that. So yeah.
I think the sessions that you have twice a week is a really good start. When I joined the session, there were persons as far as Africa and India who were part of the session. And that in itself was interesting, because you got an opportunity to interact with and be heard and listened to as well. Persons that you would not normally have had the opportunity to kind of interact with.
Yeah, it
So,
sounds like you appreciated it was worldwide. You can connect with all these different cultures and.
yeah, most definitely. So what's next for you and your organization? What's coming up that we should look out for and, want to be interested in?
Yeah, our main focus is on developing the training. Any viewers are welcome to take part in the training. We have open empathy circles every week that you can go to empathyscircle.com and you'll see the schedule there. We hold some, but they're held all around the world. A lot of people hold their own circles. So we're trying to just develop the process and make it go viral. And so we're developing the training. Wanting to add more modules to the training to make it go deeper, make it more accessible. And then also doing empathy circles, trying to do them with high profile people, because if you see a leader take part in an empathy circle with other leaders, then the people who are sort of followers, they will learn the process through observation. So my congressman here where I live in Contra Costa County in California has agreed to take part in an empathy circle, and he's Democrat, and he's willing to take part with Republican representatives. So I'm looking for Republican representatives. So we're trying to bring those people like that together. I just did an interview with Daryl Davis, who's African-American. He's a musician, and he went and actually listened to the Ku Klux Klan. He went and empathized with them basically and sort of befriended them. And it was his reaching out to them that they said, hey, this guy's pretty good. All my judgments about, African Americans are totally wrong. And it's like 200 KKK members gave up their membership because of their friendship with him. So he's interested. I just interviewed him yesterday, and we're also going to be doing some empathy circles. So I'm trying to get high profile. People would love to have Oprah Winfrey take part in one, because if she would take part in an empathy circle, it'd really go,
Everybody would do it.
Everybody would want to do it. So that's sort of the goal, get high profile people, plus we have also anyone can take part, and then develop the training and really trying to get that training to spread. So we're trying to just focus. It's just so much time in life that we're trying to focus on that layer of the empathy circle, because it's a gateway starting point. And if we can spread that as widely as possible, that's, I think what we can do at the moment.
I think that's a really honorable mission. And actually, from you mentioning it in the session we had over the weekend, I went and I listened to Daryl's TED Talk. And that was really quite an interesting experience he had, and quite admirable as well to put
and
himself
effective.
in that position. And yes, and
effective. That's the beauty of it. It's like if you are, and in the interview I did with him, he says, I don't attack people. I listen to them. I hear them out. I give them space to fully be heard. And then once they're fully heard, then they're kind of like open to listening. And then he doesn't attack them, but he goes through the logic of what they're saying and sort of says, well, my experience is different. You're judging me as being inferior. Well, actually, I have quite a bit of education. Actually, turns out I have more education than you have, And so he sort of takes apart the arguments and actually engages in a sort of a non-confrontational dialogue, and he befriends them. Actually, kind of was like helping people out, helping some of the KKK members out with like personal issues. And they say, wow, I was so wrong with what I was, how I was envisioning, this, my superiority, whatever, I'm giving this up. So yeah.
Yeah, quite effective. So I know that you offer training through your organization, but does one have to go through that type of training to be able to facilitate empathy circle?
The material is online, so anyone can just see the material. The how-to guides are there. There's a 10-minute how-to video, and then there's a 25-minute how-to video. If you watch those, And then there's some handouts, and you can see some sample videos. You can just go do it yourself. You don't have to even do a training. The process is so simple. That's I think the real strength of the process is it's so simple that anyone can kind of get into it right away. You don't need, you don't need a lot of training. You don't need years of, workshops and stuff. It's just it's a matter of doing it. So, and start with your family. It's like, there's always family conflicts. I do it with my family. We, have this space for, talking with family, or do it with some friends. So just get started on your own. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I would still definitely recommend persons to at least participate in one of your empathy circle sessions. It was really great. Any last thoughts from you before we close off?
Well, there's also, yeah, if you join, one of the trainings are free. That's by donation. So we have, the trainers are all donating their time, but if you want to, donate to the cause, there people are welcome to. So we try to keep the barriers to entry, make it very accessible. And it's also creates a community. So if you're just doing it on your own, that's great. But if you're working with us, you have a community of support. So if you decide to hold an empathy cafe, which a cafe is, you bring, any number of people, 10, 20, 30, 40 people together, you have a community you can reach out to and say, hey, I'm holding this cafe, empathy cafe. Would you come and help me facilitate? So for example, I just held a cafe with 87 participants. I, put out a call to our facilitators, and we had like 20 facilitators come. And after a little bit of a talk, we all divided up into circles. And so you've got a whole community of people that you can rely on and that can help you on your empathy journey.
That is really fantastic, because I think community is something that we really do need right now. The world going through an especially stressful 2 years. So that is really good work. So I appreciate your organization, and again, I want to thank you for joining me for this interview to talk about empathy and how we can all benefit from it and how we can all practice it. So thank you again.
Thank you for your interest. Really appreciate it.
Okay. All right. So